Hello again, friends. Welcome back to the Bible Project Daily Podcast. And we're in Genesis, part 163, which is episode 232 overall, of this amazing journey through the whole Bible, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. If you've just dropped in today, you can always go right back to the start and join us over what will, I'm sure, take quite a few years. But today, we started yesterday, in fact, a new chapter in Genesis chapter 21. And I'll just read the first two verses of it to remind you where we're launching off from. And it tells us this: Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Now, there are several things in these verses that, if you're aware of the story of Abraham prior to this point, you'll see that these events being described here are all promises God had already made, promises he had previously made. And it says in verse 1, the Lord visits Sarah, and in verse 2 that she becomes pregnant. Now, this is making a point of telling us, pointing out that what God said he would do many years ago, he has now done exactly like he said he would. Another thing that you might notice is it says that he visited Sarah. Now that's an interesting way to describe it, an interesting way to say what went on. What makes it significant is that God uses that term in the narrative on the Bible on a few occasions, and on other occasions are always very dramatic and very poignant, like when God intervenes to save Israel from the Egyptians in Genesis chapter 15. It talks about God visiting. So the word translated as visiting is usually used to indicate the fact and to highlight the fact that there's an event happening here that is of major significance. It doesn't just say God appeared, it says he visited Sarah, which suggests not only some time being spent together, some communication going on, but also it usually means that there's something supernatural happening. That's the point. And in this case, apparently, well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that what indeed is happening is miraculous, because she becomes pregnant, and we already know that she is well past childbearing age. So in spite of her age, she is seen to give birth to a son. Now later in the passage, it will also tell us that she nurses the child herself. So that again is another supernatural phenomenon on the Lord's part. A few verses later, it reminds us that Abraham is 100 years old when this happens. And after this, it also tells us he has more children. So he was quite productive in his old age. And this passage is saying, God, on this day, through Sarah, fulfills his promises just exactly like he said he would. God told Abraham he was going to be a father by Sarah way back when he was 75 years old. And they didn't have their first son, Isaac, then. And this is when he arrives. But it doesn't happen until Abraham is 100 years old. So God makes the promise, and Abraham and Sarah wait 25 years to see the fulfillment of that promise. And this passage highlights the fact, again, that God does exactly what he promised to do. And I believe that that is a biblical principle, friends. God may ask us to wait on him in order for him to fulfill his promise. But when he fulfills them, he does exactly what he said he is going to do. We can take other simple illustrations from the Bible. God promised that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem in Micah chapter 5, hundreds of years before the event. And indeed, the Messiah was born in Bethlehem as recorded in Matthew chapter 2. He also said in Isaiah 53 that the Messiah would heal the sick and would suffer on behalf of the people he saved. And of course, we know that from Matthew 8, where that verse is quoted, and from the events of the story of Christ's passion and suffering on Calvary. Because Isaiah 53 reminded us that the Son of Man would die for the sins of man. Now, of course, we know that that's exactly what happened. But did you also know that according to Daniel chapter 9, God even promises not only how this and when this will happen, but when the Messiah would appear. And that time frame was fulfilled exactly as God said it would be. And we'll hopefully get into that in more detail when we get into books like Daniel. But I have a question now to close off today's message with. And the question is, how did Abraham and Sarah respond to the fulfillment of the promise? The promise that God had made all those years ago that came to pass on this day. Well, we'll find that out in the next episode. So I hope you can come back and join with me tomorrow, and we'll carry on together on the Daily Bible Project podcast. Bye-bye for now.